A fierce storm batters New Jersey while state troopers man a checkpoint outside the city, hunting for a fugitive. When a truck comes barreling toward them, they wave it down. The driver has no identification, so one officer heads to the cab while others swing open the rear doors, only to recoil at the sight of dozens of dogs packed inside. Not long afterward, Dr. Evelyn, a court-appointed psychiatrist, arrives at the station to determine whether the mysterious driver should face prison or psychiatric care. Stepping into the holding cell, she notices the prisoner seated in a wheelchair, a fresh wound visible on one leg. When the figure turns, Evelyn sees a drag queen who introduces herself as Doug and calmly explains that the canines in the truck are his children. Evelyn persuades Doug to tell his story. He was raised in a strict, backwoods religious household. Doug's father, Mike, bred dogs for illegal fights, even starving them for days to heighten their aggression. Mike beat his wife and Doug for any perceived slight, especially if they tried to sneak food to the animals. Only Doug's older brother, Richie, escaped Mike's wrath. Richie mirrored their father's cruelty and earned Mike's favor. Though vicious in the ring, the dogs adored Doug. He would stretch out beside their pen, whispering to them and stroking their fur, occasionally slipping them scraps. One afternoon, Richie caught him in the act and tattled. During lunch, Mike confronted Doug, who admitted he preferred the dogs to his own family. Enraged, Mike dragged him outside and hurled him into the cage. Instead of attacking, the dogs pressed close, offering warmth and comfort. From that day, Doug lived in the enclosure, even through frigid winters, surviving on whatever leftovers Mike tossed his way. One evening, his mother slipped him several cans, urging him to bury them for safekeeping, then confessed she was pregnant again and planned to run away to give the new baby a better life. Doug tells Evelyn he harbors no resentment over her departure. Sometime later, Richie nailed a sign to the cage that read, "In the name of God," blaming Doug for their mother's flight. Doug merely smiled. Through the wire mesh, the letters appeared reversed, turning God into dog. Evelyn ends her session there, and after she leaves, the narrative flashes back to events leading up to Doug's arrest. A man named Juan had entered an abandoned college building and been met by a Doberman guarding the hallway. Asking for the dogman, Juan was ushered through a door into Doug's surprisingly cozy sanctuary, fitted with the security cameras Juan himself had installed months earlier. Juan delivered a puppy on behalf of Martha, the elderly laundromat owner who washed Doug's clothes. He also brought grim news. A gangster nicknamed the Executioner had been extorting local businesses weekly, and Martha could no longer pay. To cover the debts, she'd been forced to sell cherished family heirlooms. Doug assured Juan not to worry. He'd handle the situation. Sometime later, Doug disguised himself as a widow and stationed himself near a club frequented by gangsters. He sent a small dog inside, carrying a phone in its mouth, and the dog trotted right up to the Executioner, dropping the phone at his feet just as it began to ring. As the gangster picked it up, a larger dog entered the club and clamped its jaws around his groin, causing him to scream in pain. Doug calmly told him not to move unless he wanted irreversible damage. Over the phone, he laid out his terms. The Executioner was to leave Martha alone, or the dog would enjoy a nutty meal. The gangster quickly agreed. As soon as the dogs exited the bar, however, the Executioner sent his men after them. In the present, morning breaks, and Evelyn arrives at Doug's home while police scour the place for evidence. The scene is chaotic, bullet holes, blood, and bodies scattered throughout. After retrieving some of Doug's belongings, she returns to the station, where Doug is already cleaned up and dressed. He thanks her for bringing his things and picks up his story. Doug recounts his time in the cage, which lasted for months. He learned to read using old magazines hidden behind a wooden plank, likely stashed there by his mother before she left. One day, one of the dogs gave birth, and Doug secretly cared for the puppies, keeping them hidden from his family. But Richie caught him again and ran to tell Mike. Furious, Mike stormed outside with a gun. Doug clung to the cage door, screaming at him not to hurt the puppies, while the dogs barked and growled alongside him. Mike shot Doug through the cage. The bullet shattered one of Doug's fingers and ricocheted into his spine, dropping him to the ground. Seeing that things were getting out of control, Richie dragged Mike back into the house, but not before tossing a handkerchief down to Doug. In agony and barely able to move, Doug wrapped the cloth around his bleeding hand and placed the severed finger into a small bag. Then, Holding up a magazine, he showed one of the dogs a picture of a police car and gave it the bag, instructing it to run through the bullet hole in the cage and find help. The dog sprinted across town and eventually found a police cruiser, where it sat patiently until officers noticed. Within minutes, police swarmed Doug's home and broke in, discovering the boy injured in the cage and Richie clinging to Mike in terror. An ambulance rushed Doug to the hospital, but the doctors didn't remove the bullet. Back in the present, Doug explains to Evelyn that he can walk short distances with leg braces, just enough to get into bed, and he can stand for a few seconds at a time. Removing the bullet is risky. If anything shifts in that area, it could paralyze him permanently. In fact, every time he stands, he runs that risk. Mike received a 20-year sentence, but he took his own life only 2 weeks into it. Richie got 12 years and, thanks to good behavior, walked free after 8. The morning he stepped outside the prison gates, a handful of dogs waited for him and quietly began to trail him. As Richie moved through town, more dogs fell in behind until he finally noticed the growing pack. He ducked into an alley to escape, but the animals leapt on him and tore him apart. After Doug left the hospital, the state placed him in an orphanage. He never blended in. While the other kids played outside, he remained in the library, wheelchair parked between shelves, reading everything he could. His one friend was Salma, a young woman who helped around the home and adored Shakespeare. Learning that Doug loved books too, she introduced him to all her favorites and even coaxed him into putting on small plays for the other children. The props were homemade and cheap, but the pair poured heart and energy into every performance, and the kids loved it. Doug relished the costumes and the makeup lessons Salma gave him, agreeing with her claim that paint could let him become anyone he wished. Salma's brilliance, creativity, and singular outlook made Doug fall for her fast. But one day, she left to chase an acting career. Over the years, Doug clipped every article about her productions and pasted them into a meticulous scrapbook. Adulthood found him earning a bachelor's in biological sciences through online courses and landing a job at a dog shelter. When Salma finally reached Broadway, Doug attended a performance and tried to approach the stage, but the crowd blocked him. An usher led him backstage, where Salma recognized him at once. She beamed at the flowers he brought and lit up even more when he presented the scrapbook. So touched, she thanked him with a kiss, and Doug's hopes soared, until the director strolled in, praised the scrapbook too, and revealed he was Salma's husband. They were already expecting a child. Crushed, Doug offered polite congratulations and returned to the shelter. There, he forced himself upright, shouting and pounding the kennel doors in rage. The dogs barked back, and when he collapsed to the floor, one clever animal worked the latch free, releasing the pack so they could nuzzle and comfort him. Later that night, Doug cut his hair short, a personal ritual to let go of what hurt. Sometime later, 2 government agents came knocking on Doug's door with bad news. The dog shelter was being shut down, supposedly due to budget cuts. Doug pushed back, pointing out that the budget had been slashed every year since he started, and he'd kept the shelter running solely on donations. The only municipal support he had was the building itself. Cornered by facts, the men admitted the truth. The city had sold the property to a private developer hoping to turn a profit. Doug had until Monday to vacate, and with any luck, the dogs would be placed in other shelters. But when Monday rolled around, the building stood empty. Doug had vanished along with all the dogs. That's when he relocated to the abandoned college building, where he spent his time reading to his furry family. Eventually, he began searching for a job, but each attempt ended in rejection because of his wheelchair. One afternoon, he wandered into a club looking to hire a bartender, arriving just in time to catch a rehearsal by the club's drag performers. Instantly enchanted by their costumes and artistry, Doug approached the owner, not for the bar job, but to ask for a chance to perform. The owner was skeptical, pointing out that audiences wouldn't likely be interested in a wheelchair-bound performer. In response, Doug got up from the chair and explained he could stand for the duration of a song. The queens were charmed by his sincerity and talent, and they persuaded the owner to give him a shot. That Friday, the drag performers helped Doug get dressed. Clothes, makeup, a wig, everything needed for a proper debut. Hoping to make an unforgettable first impression, Doug even removed his leg braces, asking his new friends to be ready to catch him when the performance ended. He waited behind the curtain until his name was called, Edith Piaf. As the spotlight hit him, Doug began singing in French, gently moving his hands as he poured his soul into the lyrics. The audience, and even his fellow queens, were mesmerized. The raw emotion in his voice cut straight through the room, and by the time he finished, the crowd erupted into applause, calling for more. As the curtains closed, the other queens rushed forward and caught Doug just before he collapsed. From that night forward, Doug had a regular Friday performance slot at the club. It didn't pay enough to live on, though, so he launched a unique side project, matching lonely individuals with the perfect dog for companionship and protection. His services didn't end there. If someone needed extra assistance, Doug would step into gray areas, similar to how he handled the executioner. One day, while cooking, the dogs helped him fetch ingredients from the pantry, and that gave Doug an idea, what he called fair redistribution of wealth. His smallest dog would sneak into upscale homes through tiny openings, like windows cracked open or ceiling vents, spaces no human would ever think to secure. Once inside, the little one would unlock a larger entry point, allowing the rest of the pack to enter and do their part. Together, Doug and his dogs would steal as much jewelry as they could carry, and no one ever suspected that animals were behind the break-ins. Everything went smoothly for a while, until one day, a wealthy woman filed a claim, and the case landed on the desk of insurance agent Ackerman, who immediately suspected fraud. According to the report, all the windows and doors had been locked, except for a small bathroom window, and strangely, none of the homeowner's dogs had barked. Still, the woman handed over her security camera footage. As Ackerman reviewed the video, he spotted something bizarre, a dog running away from the house with something in its mouth. It seemed ridiculous, but the image sparked a memory of other strange, unsolved cases over the past few months. So, he went back through those recordings as well. To his surprise, the same group of dogs appeared in each clip, although previous agents had written them off as random strays. In one particular video, Ackerman saw a man dressed as a guard standing beside a truck, waiting for the dogs. Running the truck's license plate led him to Doug's file. And from there, he learned that Doug was performing regularly at a local club. That Friday, Ackerman went to the show and was stunned to see Doug on stage wearing one of the stolen necklaces. After the performance, Ackerman approached Doug in the dressing room, holding a flower and pretending to be a fan. He invited Doug to dinner, but Doug politely declined, saying he had to go home to feed his kids. Undeterred, Ackerman followed him quietly as Doug made his way back to the abandoned building. Armed with a gun, Ackerman crept inside, but the dogs quickly sensed him and Doug told them to hide. Ackerman encountered a Doberman standing guard in the hallway and thought about shooting. But just then, Doug appeared and calmly told him that the jewelry was in a safe. Once Ackerman had the box and sat down to check its contents, Doug gave a quiet command, and the dogs attacked, killing him. Now that Evelyn has heard most of Doug's life story, he explains the incident that led to his arrest. The night after he helped Martha, the executioner and his men managed to track down the abandoned building. They had tortured Juan until he gave up the location, and once they confirmed it, they killed him with a gunshot. The noise alerted Doug. He immediately ordered the dogs to get into a war position while he armed himself with one of his collected weapons. The executioner ignored the Doberman guarding the entry and opened fire on the heavy metal door, which held firm. Meanwhile, Doug slipped out through a narrow, hidden corridor. At that moment, a small dog sprinted down the narrow corridor, and one of the gangsters gave chase, following it through a hole in the wall, only to be dragged inside by the larger dogs and torn apart. The gang then split up, each member following a different dog that kept peeking around corners and luring them deeper into the trap. One man followed a dog into a bathroom where the floor was slick with water. As soon as he stepped inside, the dog released a live cable, electrocuting him on the spot. Another gangster pursued a Chihuahua into a locker room, and just as he got close, Doug fired through the wall, dropping him instantly. One man blundered into the wrong room and was quickly surrounded by massive dogs who mauled him without hesitation. Another followed a small dog only to fall into a hidden pit. His friend rushed to help, but the dog shoved him in two. Doug soon arrived and shot them both. Out in the corridor, another gangster stepped onto a trap that left him dangling upside down from the ceiling. Helpless as a dog, jumped up to attack him. Not far away, a similar trap claimed another victim, who was also mauled by the dogs. Growing nervous, the executioner barked at his men to fetch him a better weapon. Just then, Doug opened fire through the wall, hitting several men. The executioner fired back, and one of his bullets struck Doug in the back, forcing him to drop and crawl away. Wounded and desperate, Doug dragged himself through a narrow passage back to his quarters. Meanwhile, the executioner used the heavy weapon to finally breach the metal door. He stormed inside and aimed at Doug, only to hear the hollow click of an empty chamber. Before he could reload, the dogs lunged and killed him. After the chaos, Doug and his dogs fled the scene in a truck, which is when the police finally caught up with them. While Doug sat in the back of squad car, he gave the dogs a subtle signal. On cue, they bolted, scattering before anyone could stop them. Now, in the present, Evelyn tells Doug she's heard enough and walks away. Doug lights a cigarette by the window, smiling faintly as he hears a lone dog howl in the distance. It turns out one of his dogs has been waiting nearby, and at the sound of the howl, the rest of the pack starts arriving. As Doug gets dressed in the nice clothes Evelyn brought him, the dogs make their way into the police station. Their presence alone is enough to frighten the front desk officer into fainting. A thin, nimble dog sneaks in, steals the keys, and slips through the bars to drop them at Doug's cell door. Doug unlocks the door, leaves his wheelchair behind, and begins the slow walk to the church across the street. Once inside, he looks up and asks God to pass judgment on him. Then, exhausted and broken, he collapses to the floor, taking his final breath. Soon, his loyal dogs gather around his body, and one by one, dogs from all over town join them to say goodbye. Meanwhile, far away, the Doberman returns to Evelyn's home, where it silently takes its place by the door, ready to protect her from her abusive ex-husband.